My parents were really the reason my sister and I were able to overcome the odds and pursue our dreams. What I was struck by growing up was that the school system didn't often see the value my parents brought to the table. My hope is that this can finally be the moment that we begin to view parents as the assets that they are.
Hi there, folks. My name is Tiffany Taylor, and I have the pleasure of serving as a partner and co president for the ASU+GSV Summit. As a former classroom teacher and someone who believes deeply in our mission here at GSV and in the power and potential of partnerships, I am thrilled to have Alejandro Gibes de Gac with me today. Alejandro is the founder of the Springboard Collaborative, an organization that works to close the literacy gap by bridging the gap between home and school. And he is also the co-founder of Paloma, an organization that is harnessing AI to unleash parents' untapped teaching potential. Thanks for being here, Alejandro.
Thank you so much for having me and for the lovely intro.
So, over the last several years, you and I have spent time talking about what it was like to start our careers as classroom teachers in Philadelphia. We've had reflections on the innovation and collaboration that's required to advance learning. And we spent some time talking about our stories and the journey that brought us to this work over 2 decades ago. And so, while I'm excited for our listeners to definitely learn more about the work you're leading alongside educators and parents, before we dive in, I'd love for you to talk to us a bit about your why. What brought you to this work and what's sustaining you?
I appreciate the question. So I come to this work as a teacher, I come to it as a father, and I come to it as first as a son. So my family immigrated to the U.S. when I was 7, seeking educational opportunity, like so many folks that come to this country. Unfortunately, it didn't take long in Carrollton, Georgia, for my parents to realize that school serving poor families like ours don't always live up to America's promise. So my parents were really the reason my sister and I were able to overcome the odds and pursue our dreams. They saw a fuller version of our potential than the school system did, and they helped us to realize that potential by setting and achieving one goal and then the next and the next and the next. So she went to Columbia, I went to Harvard, and eventually, like it's no coincidence that between us, we've started 4 organizations that all help families support their children's learning. And what I was struck by growing up was that the school system didn't often see the value my parents brought to the table, and my teachers didn't really know how to engage with them, especially across lines of difference and with a language barrier. So I carried that experience with me into the classroom. I became a first grade teacher, bilingual teacher in Philly.
Yeah.
And there I felt frustrated that my school and our system still hadn't figured out how to help parents and teachers work together as a team to support student learning. It had always felt like a missed opportunity for me growing up, kind of these parallel universes that never touched. And it still felt like a missed opportunity to me in the classroom. I dug into all the research showing that parental involvement in their children's learning is the most powerful predictor of students' academic success. And I
Nice.
started to wonder, like, well, why aren't we doing more about this as a sector? We've been so intentional about optimizing classroom instruction, and let's do that. Let's do right by kids in classrooms. And it also started to feel like we didn't have enough leverage. Kids spend 13% of their waking hours inside classrooms. To me, it felt like unless and until we can equip families to support learning at home, we're not going to have the leverage we need to shift these massive, intractable problems that haven't budged for decades on end. So anyway, that is the long and winding road that gives me my why, my purpose, which is to unleash parents' untapped teaching potential.
I love that. I always tell people that it's helpful to understand who the leader is before we start to understand what the leader is taking on. So I appreciate you giving us a line of sight into your why. In one of our recent conversations of just about the innovations on the horizon in education, we started wrestling with both the new and persisting promises and pain points in education. And during that chat, you said district leaders are facing significant challenges in ramping up instructional time while dealing with diminishing resources and teacher capacity. Talk to us about this a bit and would love to hear your viewpoint on how viewing parents as educators changes this equation.
Totally. I mean, I've got all the empathy in the world for district leaders right now. Like the job has never been harder. You've got to
Yeah.
somehow ramp up instructional time to continue to accelerate learning recovery. But you got to do that with shrinking resources, shrinking budgets, and with like a teaching force that's quite overwhelmed and stretched thin in many places. it can feel like an unsolvable puzzle. To me, what makes it feel a lot more solvable is partnering with families. I believe that parents are like the single greatest and the most underutilized instructional resource in most districts. The research finds that families are the primary determinants of kids' learning and life outcomes. One study found that 80% of the variation in public school performance stems from families' influence, not teachers, which makes sense. Like kids spend, as I mentioned, like 13% of their waking hours inside classrooms. It stands to reason that families are the primary influencers of their children's life and learning outcomes. The good news, I think, is that families across the socioeconomic spectrum have the will and skill to rise to the occasion and drive their children's learning outcomes. In terms of will, like no one on earth is more motivated than parents to support their children, right? That's a love and a motivation that's honed by 6 million years of evolution. It's about as powerful a force
Yeah.
as I can think of. So the intrinsic and inherent motivation is there. And then in
Yes.
terms of skill, this is where I think lots of folks sleep on parents, particularly marginalized parents.
Mhm.
Research shows that marginalized families can be as effective as teachers in tutoring kids one on one. They're able to do it, and what's more, they're willing and able to tutor their kids for free for the love of the game, which can alleviate for a resource constrained district that's looking for more instructional time and has a bunch of folks who are willing to do that for their kid without expecting to come on payroll. That starts to feel like a more solvable puzzle than maybe it had been before. And then the other dimension is also capacity constraints. Like families,
Mhm.
unlike professional tutors, they're in abundant supply. They're not hard to source. They're there. If we can equip and activate parents to be able to live into their teaching potential, then we can unlock this world of instructional time that otherwise lays dormant beneath the surface in almost every school and district in the country and the world. So that's what makes me optimistic that we can kind of there's a way to bring the promise and potential of one-on-one instruction and high dosage tutoring rather to virtually every kid without incurring the typical cost and capacity constraints that kind of challenge the tutoring sector if we can unlock that potential within families.
I know you and I told you when I was still in the classroom, my parents were my greatest partners, right? In everything that I did for my students. And why do you believe that even today, even what we know about the research, even what we know about the motivation and the skill of our parents, why are they still the most underutilized instructional asset in education?
Oh gosh, how long do you have? I think there's a lot of things that come together.
Yeah.
People in the education sector, like when they look at a college kid, a high schooler, even that they can so easily see their teaching and tutoring potential. Uh,
Yeah.
and too many people in our sector, when they look at a parent, particularly a black and brown parent, they don't see that same teaching potential. Uh, and I think if you trace that all the way back, you can find kind of the origins of that mental model in racism and in sexism, quite frankly. And that requires a new mental model for our sector. Uh, as we talked about, parents are more motivated than anyone to help their kids, and they're just as good, as just as capable as anyone at doing that well. The challenge is that we haven't given parents the basic things we'd give any teacher. Like as a sector, you often hear parents are their children's first and best teachers, and I think a lot of people genuinely believe that.
Yeah.
So then why haven't we equipped parents with like the fundamental resources we'd give any teacher, curriculum and coaching, right? If you send a teacher into a classroom without a curriculum, without coaching, can you really expect them to live up to their teaching potential? I think if we get those foundational pieces in place for families, then we can unlock that potential that lives within, and hopefully shift that larger mental model as a result.
Yeah.
Historically,
Yep.
our sector has tended to sidestep families for decades on end, and it hasn't been working out all that well for us, right? We don't have a ton to show for the many billions of dollars invested in classroom intervention over a very long period of time. My hope is that in this moment where the needs are enormous, right, we have to continue to accelerate learning recovery, and the resources are constrained. My hope is that necessity can be the mother of invention, and perhaps challenge us to look at the resources we already have within our districts that might be underutilized, under leveraged. And my hope is that this can finally be the moment that we begin to view parents as the assets that they are, and equip them to join as teaching partners and meaningfully move the needle on their kids' learning outcomes.
I really appreciate you just reflecting and sharing your thoughts about just the resources and what it means to equip our parents. And when I think about education leaders, and I'm talking about education leaders at the classroom level, at the school level, at the systems level, one of our responsibilities is to set vision and direction,
Yeah.
right? And I know you've often mentioned that there's a disconnect between the student achievement goals and family support goals in a lot of our district and system and school plans. How do we start to bridge that particular gap?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think of it in two ways. One is just like as a thought exercise. If you were to ask a district leader, like, picture all the K-5 students you have in your district. Imagine if you could flip a switch and have nearly that many tutors. Imagine if those tutors were willing to tutor K-5 kids at least 3 times a week consistently in reading and math.
Yeah.
Imagine if they deliver rigorous tier one aligned instruction using high quality instructional materials and do it in a way that's culturally responsive. Imagine if the tutors shared the identities with the kids in your community. You don't have to manage these tutors any more than you need to manage like an AI robo tutor, but unlike a chatbot, imagine if these tutors have strong relationships with kids and deepen that relationship over time. And imagine if you could unlock all that tutoring for like less than $3 an hour. Would you do it? In the thought exercise, you'd be hard pressed to find a district leader who doesn't say, "Great, sign me up. Sounds too good to be true." And yet the disconnect plays out in this kind of in the siloed structures that can sometimes happen within districts where virtually every strategic plan, and I read so many of these, almost invariably that there's a kind of first pillar that's some variation of student achievement, academic excellence, closing the achievement gap, equity, all related to student learning outcomes. And then often like the final pillar has something to do with family and community engagement. But like those two bodies of work, sometimes they operate as parallel universes. They aren't necessarily fully integrated. The way I see it, they're like two sides of the same coin. Mobilizing parents to give kids access to instructional time across the continuum of home and school is your best lever to achieve your academic outcomes priority. But if those efforts aren't integrated, if it's kind of parent university over here and like our HQIM rollout over there, then you're not actually going to unlock
Yeah.
that potential.
So let's make this a bit more concrete for our listeners.
Sure.
Can you talk to us about a success story or case study that exemplifies the impact of this approach and how it's worked in practice? What does it look like for students and educators and parents, Alejandro, when they are trying to bridge this gap and unleashing the potential of parents as teachers and educators?
So what Paloma is, it's a mobile web app that helps families build and sustain the habit of tutoring their kids for 15 minutes a day. So imagine caregivers sitting with their children and engaging in 15 minutes of rigorous, curriculum
Yeah.
aligned, and joyful instruction day in and day out. It doesn't sound like much, like 15 minutes. Parents find it quite approachable. It's why they latch onto it. But over the course of a school year, you can unlock up to 1,000 hours of one-on-one instruction in every classroom. And families that build that habit in kindergarten and stick with it, by the time their kids enter middle school, they'll have given their children the equivalent of an entire extra year of instruction as a result of that daily kind of micro habit. So that's what we're trying to build. And very concretely, the way it looks is that every day we text families their bite-sized tutoring session that they engage in together with their child that day. And any given session has like a three components: I do, we do, you do. There's a short little video, 30, 45 seconds, modeling for the family. Here's the skill that you're going to be practicing with your child this particular day, and in very parent friendly uh, um, framing. And importantly, we align the scope and sequence that families are working on with each district's tier one core curriculum in literacy and in math to ensure coherence between what the educator is teaching in the classroom and how the family is reinforcing that same skill at home at that same moment in time. So family gets a short video. Oh my gosh, this is like, okay, we're practicing the S&P letter sound with our kid. And then Paloma guides the duo, the caregiver and their child, through a practice exercise to continue reinforcing and deepening that child's proficiency with that skill. And then any given day ends with the independent practice where the child is either reading a book and or engaging in a math story problem. And the parent's role is to be the coach, the supporter, the educator, the tutor, but kind of gradually handing the reins to the child. Part of what makes the experience so joyful for families is that we're leveraging AI to personalize that content quite deeply based on kids' interests. So we'll ask the family, what do you want today's content to be about? And the family will answer with like whatever it is that's bringing their child joy and sparking their curiosity. So they might say like, our cousins came over for pizza last night, or like Ignacio's gonna win the baseball championship this weekend, or we went to Abuela's house and made arepas together. Whatever's meaningful to them. And as you can imagine, we can use AI to generate decodable books and math story problems that pedagogically reinforce a particular skill they're working on that day, but thematically do it in a way that really resonates deeply with the child's personal interests. And we visually render kids as protagonists in their own stories in a way that honors their identity. So you literally see yourself in your books and in your math problems. That's the day in and day out family experience. 15 minutes, highly effective, rigorous, but also like deeply emotionally resonant and fun with your kid. And really, the goal is to help folks develop the habit. And the way we think about that is we look first at utilization. There's way too many ed tech tools that gather dust in the virtual closet. We want to make sure that this is something that people actually avail themselves of the resource. And what we've seen so far in districts like HISD, and we partner with KIP and Rocketship and Capital District in Delaware. We're launching with LA and Metro Nashville. Title I districts, we're seeing 75% of all parents successfully tutor their child using the tool. Utilization's nice, but dosage is really where you get the outcomes. So next we look at that. And there we see that 70% of participating families last year tutored their child at least 3 times per week on average over the entire implementation period. So a consistent, persistent, sticky habit. What that habit unlocks is instructional time. That's kind of the big unlock. And last year we saw that the average teacher saw families in their class deliver 14 and a half hours of one-on-one instruction any given week. A teacher could replicate that by staying after school for 3 hours every day, Monday through Friday, and doing it themselves, just having kids, drop in for tutoring, and show me a teacher who doesn't want to go home at the end of a long day. It's much more sustainable to do it in partnership with families. And then, of course, like the North Star outcome that we all care most about, the reason that that instructional time is meaningful is that it moves the needle on student learning outcomes. So to zoom in on Houston, they were really focused on literacy as part of their science of reading and kind of new curriculum rollout. There we saw that parents who used the tool, their kid was 122% more likely to go from below to at or above benchmark in word reading, 48% more likely to go from below to at or above benchmark in decoding. This is on the other side of a 7-week pilot we did at the end of the school year. Economically disadvantaged, multilingual learners, they had disproportionately larger gains. The kids who were furthest behind made the most progress. All encouraging, not a randomized controlled trial. So, all the disclaimers, but it gives us really powerful signal that not only are parents willing and able to put in the work in a really simple, lightweight approach, but that for all the efforts that they're undertaking, it's meaningfully and measurably moving the needle on student learning outcomes. And then as a result, we're excited to grow over tenfold in partnership with Houston this year.
Wow, those are some incredibly impressive results. You know, as I listen to you talk about the how of the work and what some of the results are, I do wonder, have you heard as a concern that some might worry that this approach could be seen as replacing traditional tutoring or other interventions? Is that a valid concern? Is that coming up? How does it fit into the broader educational strategy for some of your partners?
I think it's a both and, not a one or the other. And I think the easiest way that I wrap my head around it is
Yeah.
via like an MTSS pyramid. So if you look at like the traditional tutoring models live typically in tier two. It's for the kids who have fallen behind in reading and math that need intensive additional support. And the work that I run Paloma and I run Springboard Collaborative, the work of Springboard lives in tier two. Like what's the intervention that we can offer, high dosage, high intensity, and lots of support for the kids who need it most. There's always going to be a place in the world for that, and like leveraging families, even in those tier two and tier three
Yeah.
interventions, it gives you a lot more leverage on your resources. I see Paloma not as a replacement for tier two or tier three
Yeah.
interventions, but rather as a tier one complement. In the same way that every teacher has access to, CKLA and Eureka or whatever it is that you rolled out, so too should every family have access to the instructional resources and support they need to be a teaching partner alongside uh, the educator. And so if you envision a school system, I want every family to have access to a resource, whether it's Paloma or otherwise, that enables them to join the team and accelerate their children's learning on a daily basis. And I want that to enable districts to be really targeted with kind of the finite resources and the increased price tag that comes along with tier two and tier three, to be judicious with how to deploy those resources for the kids that need further support.
In this conversation, you talk about we're building habits, right?
Yeah.
And in our previous conversations, I've heard you talk a little bit about this journey from intention to habit to identity for parents. Can you explain this concept and what you mean by that, and just
Yeah.
why it's crucial for success?
I think habit building is everything. I think it's not half the battle. I think it's like 80% of the battle or more. That there tends to be so much focus on content. And content matters. Like you need to get the content piece right, and you need to ensure that it's aligned. You need to make sure that there's coherence between what educators are doing, what families are doing, what tutors are doing, and also like content just gets you to the starting line. It feels like just because you bought running shoes doesn't mean you ran a marathon. Like it
Right.
enables you to go
You're right.
running, but you still
Yeah.
got to go running, and that's quite hard for people to do. Right, it's hard
Yeah.
for people to take an intention and turn that intention into a practice, and
Yeah.
then turn that practice into a habit, and eventually
Yeah.
turn that habit into an identity. There's a lot
Mhm.
of important steps there,
Mhm.
and people tend to get lost along the way, whatever it is, right? Whether it's going to the gym or drinking 8 glasses of water a day or supporting your children's learning, like
Yeah.
it's all a part of that same challenge.
Yeah.
But there's so much that's known about that, right? From the realm of behavioral science and so much work in user experience and design. There's a lot that's known about how to help people navigate that journey. And so we're applying those lessons to the particular quest of helping families to turn their intention to support their child's learning and success into a practice that they're going to do on a Tuesday, into a
Yeah.
habit that they're going to do Wednesday, Thursday, next week, next month, next year, and then into an identity that just crystallizes we are a family that sets and achieves goals together.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
when I looked around me at my classmates at Harvard, I just saw a bunch of kids who grew up in families that encouraged them to set and achieve goals, and it was even like a foregone conclusion that they didn't know how to navigate the world any other way.
Yeah.
Just a belief that like we set goals and we achieve them, and we've got a constellation of support around us of folks who help us to set and achieve those goals. So that ultimately is the end game. We want to not only help folks build the habit, but we want to build the habit in a way that leads to this kind of transformative identity shift in a way that can help us as a society to break the poverty cycle. That's the intent. But I'm heartened by the fact that there is so much that's known that we can apply to our work. As an example, the chief product officer, former chief product officer at Duolingo, for a while. Jorge Mazal, we've been very fortunate to bring him on as an advisor. He wrote the book on a lot of this stuff and has been tremendously helpful in making our tool kind of the most retentive and habit oriented version of itself.
I appreciate that. I think about, this piece around identity and orientation to like this culture of achievement, the sense of what's possible, and just the expectations, right? The being able, like you said, to look at your classmates and be in a space where the expectation, right, is that you will set the goal and achieve the goal, and helping our students and our parents, lean further into those
Yep.
same expectations that they may have or build them from the foundations that they currently have. So really appreciate you sharing that orientation with us.
I think that that's also the power in a multiplayer tool. There's a version of building a habit where it's just a learner and their phone, and
Yep.
that's kind of the universe.
Yeah.
That is not our universe. Our universe is the technology facilitating an interaction between multiple folks.
Mhm.
So,
Exactly.
and that creates a greater complexity and a greater challenge, but it also creates so much opportunity to
Yep.
deepen the relationship, embed the tool and the habit within like the most powerful relationship on earth, like caregivers and like within families. And all kinds of possibilities then to turn that habit into an identity when it lives within a relationship
Yeah.
versus kind of as a as a single player experience and relationship with the technology.
Yeah, and I think of what that how that translates that relationship, that experience to the classroom and
Yeah.
how that transforms the interactions that an educator will then have with the family and the student. I think that the power in that is like what will lead us to the culture of achievement and realize like, shared visions for outcomes for our students that I'm excited, super excited. So as we wrap up, when you think about the impact you are seeing, like for students, for
Yeah.
educators, parents, what is your greatest hope for the work ahead, for education leaders and innovators in our community that are really paying attention to the untapped potential of parents and their power?
Uh, I want to make I want to make things feel much more winnable
Hmm.
for parents, for teachers, for kids, for admins. There's a lot of people that feel like they're in a really tough spot. They've got high aspirations. They've got all the hope and ambition in the world, whether it's a parent kind of looking in the eyes of their kindergartner,
Yeah.
superintendent kind of starting a brand new year with a full slate of initiatives, a teacher kind of like getting their classroom ready and welcoming kind of another cohort of kids and families. That there's such a deep desire to win, and yet our structures have made it so hard for any of those folks to win. They're each kind of like on their own, and they're against really long odds. But the irony is that like they've got a common goal, and they need each other in order to succeed at reaching that common goal. We just haven't made it easy for them to work together as a team. So my deep hope is that by making it a heck of a lot easier, reducing all the friction, so that the path of least resistance is to work together as a team, then all of a sudden you can begin to win at some of your deepest aspirations and in your family and in your classroom, in your school, in your district. That's the hope. One teacher that we work with, she captured it best. She said teaching feels like a team sport now. I run my leg of the race during the school day, hands the
Yeah.
baton to families. They reliably run their leg of the race at home. And together we get a heck of a lot more done.
Yeah.
If we can take that experience and ensure it's the experience of every educator and of every family to feel not alone in kind of the journey of trying to help their kid be successful in a society that might not otherwise have it that way, uh, then I think we can begin to solve some of these intractable challenges that have plagued our country and our world for far too long.
I love it. Well, Alejandro, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your vision with us today. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. No matter what your role is across the education ecosystem, I hope you were inspired by the work Paloma is leading with education leaders and parents in communities across the country. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.